And if I'm not mistaken, Eddie Van Halen at some point claimed he kind of got his idea for his own guitar tapping from attending a Genesis show. I don't know if there was a story there or not.
Apparently, yes. And I think one of his famous pieces he says he got from Shadow of the Hierophant, where I've got a tapping section where the guitar is on its own and it taps away. So I think the piece Eruption is he said it is based on that. And it's a great shame that I never got to meet him. So we didn't get to connect, but I know he's in spirit, and I think he was a stunning player. There's no doubt about that. And so to play a small part or be part of the building blocks that enabled his incredible technique to flourish is a proud moment for me.
You mentioned the Mellotron earlier.
Yes.
And I know that you were probably, I guess, the driving force between, in having that become something that the band used. One of the main reasons the band added the instrument. Where did you first run across the Mellotron?
First time I'd seen a Mellotron used live was with King Crimson in 1969, before they recorded the extraordinary In the Court of the Crimson King. So I'd also seen Moody Blues with one, and it seemed to me that the bands that possessed the ability, if you closed your eyes, to imagine that you were watching much more than the sum of the parts. You were hearing a symphony orchestra plus a band, and depending on how it was recorded, of course, some bands managed to make it sound just like a Mellotron and a squeaky thing. Other bands could make it sound absolutely symphonic. And if you think of tracks such as Epitaph with King Crimson, you hear something that is mighty. I think that I've always been drawn to the idea of symphonic rock, or rather expanded rock, inclusive music. And once the Beatles started working with string sections and brass and many more things beside, Indian musicians, instruments that you hadn't heard of, it seems to me that world music is at its best fully inclusive, and is allowed to, in my book, is allowed to involve influences from absolutely everywhere and every time. Jazz influences, classical influences, pop, rock, blues, you name it.
It makes me think of Paul Simon's Graceland album, which had so many African influences in it.
Yes.
And that was something that, it was it seemed like seemingly a big departure for him, but was such a phenomenal record in and of itself. What Genesis album are you the most proud of as you look back, or is it tough to choose because it's like choosing between children?
Well, it's a funny thing. I would have said a year or so ago, Selling England by the Pound, but it's the 50th anniversary this year of Foxtrot, and I'm just about to go into rehearsals with my band to go out and start playing it in its entirety. And listening back to it, some tracks which I haven't heard for a very long time, I'm struck by the quality of it, the quality of the writing and the breadth of ideas. And I think that it's extraordinarily well written. As always with early albums, there are things that I would change because personal experiences in production and techniques for recording things have shifted so greatly. The goalposts have shifted so much since that time. And personal knowledge and the way things are approached in today, the way drums are treated with compression and deliberate distortion and ambient miking and all of that, and to be able to create the sound of, for instance, the way the Mellotron sounded when we were in Palace Sports in sports halls in Italy, and made the Mellotron sound absolutely huge and wonderful. And yet when I listen back to the album, I hear it sounding fairly small and dry, and I want to change it. So over the years, I've revisited quite a lot of this material and re-recorded some of it, and in some cases added literally a symphony orchestra as well. So I tend to pull out all the stops when I do re-records of older material, and I want to honor the spirit of the original, but I also want to broaden its shoulders and expand the canvas, really, so I love the way it was written. I think the execution can always be a little better. And I had this conversation with Bill Bruford some years ago, where he said to me, "Oh, I understand why you want to record this stuff. You want to have it in tune and in time simultaneously." And this is it. It isn't enough just to have, whatever it is that pleased fans at the time. You want to leave it with your own mark on it. Even if it's just a footnote to the original, to be able to say, yeah, well, that bit, yeah, boom, better guitar sound, sustain, all those things I wanted to have back in the day. And I'll go at these re-records very often and use up to 300 tracks. And of course, back in the day, we would have only had, with the very first album I did with Genesis, 16 track, and then 24, etc., etc.
Walk me through the creation of Firth of Fifth. How did that song come about?
Firth of Fifth was an idea that Tony Banks. He basically had the whole song worked out, other than the instrumental parts when the singing stopped, and I started playing the melody that was originally played on piano and would first be introduced on flute. I started playing it on guitar and using bends to make it sound a little bit more Eastern. And I thought it was a great melody. And again, as soon as he added Mellotron to it, plus the band, plus organ, plus we had bass pedals, so you had all this sort of, you had the kind of foundations of classical stuff. Yes, if it had been orchestra, it would have been basses instead of bass pedals, but you had that. I think Mike Rutherford added some sped up guitar to it to do the arpeggios, and I think it was a very beautiful sounding track. And I think Phil's drumming is really very, very good on it. I think it was a standout track, and it's the most famous Genesis guitar solo. It is the one. That's it.
Is it true that Dancing with the Moonlit Knight was originally going to be called Disney? And if so, what's the story there?
Well, actually, the story is that it was probably going to be called Selling England by the Pound, but that ended up being the title of the album. Yeah. And we didn't want to bring too much focus to bear on one track to the exclusion of all others. The Disney idea comes from the very last section, the very quiet jam over two repeated chords that Mike Rutherford plays. And for some reason, we used to call it Disney. I think we had in mind that it was a little bit like a cartoon, and it wouldn't be the first time that we were influenced by the music that Walt Disney used. And I think, again, it's this Beatle connection that is so prevalent. You hear the influence of Disney upon the Beatles. I'm the Walrus is a kind of audio cartoon, and of course became a cartoon later on when there was Yellow Submarine, the movie. But I think we Brits were influenced by not just all things American, but all things caricature, cartoon,